"You will give us sons," said the three giant women to the virgin billionaire. And in the very next moment, his world turned upside down. A shy billionaire crash lands on a hidden island, only to wake up surrounded by three towering women who look at him like he's the answer to a prayer. But they don't want his money. And they don't want what he's terrified they're asking for. They want something far bigger, something life-changing. Before he can even breathe, they pull him into a fight to protect their home, their boys, and their entire future. But danger is coming from the sea, and this billionaire has never been a hero to anyone, not even himself. So why did these giant women choose him? What secret do they know that he doesn't? And when the island is threatened, will he run? Or finally become the man they believe he can be? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Felix Ames stared at his reflection in the private jet's window, dark circles shadowing his eyes after another sleepless night at the lab. The pre-dawn sky painted the tarmac in shades of grey as ground crew scurried around the aircraft like busy ants. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and checked his watch for the 5th time in as many minutes. "We're all set for takeoff, Mr. Ames," the pilot announced over the intercom. "Flight time to Tokyo should be approximately 11 hours. Felix nodded reflexively, though no one could see him. His stomach churned at the thought of the tech summit awaiting him. Hundreds of people, countless handshakes, endless small talk. But as the CEO of Ames Technologies, he couldn't avoid it forever. The jet's engines hummed to life, and Felix gripped the leather armrests. Despite owning the plane, flying still made him nervous. He pulled out his tablet, hoping to distract himself with work during the long flight ahead. The device's screen reflected his tired face, a man in his late 30s with prematurely graying temples and worry lines etched deeply around his mouth. 3 hours into the flight, the first hints of trouble appeared. The plane shuddered, causing Felix's tablet to slip from his hands. Outside his window, dark clouds had gathered, transforming the peaceful morning into an ominous grey mass. "Mr. Ames." The pilot's voice crackled through the intercom, tension evident in his tone. "We're encountering some unexpected weather. I recommend fastening your seatbelt." Felix's hands trembled as he secured the belt. The turbulence intensified, and his breath came in short gasps. The plane dropped suddenly, and his stomach lurched into his throat. Rain pelted the windows with increasing fury. "Mayday! Mayday!" he heard the pilot's voice through the cockpit door. "This is Ames 739er experiencing severe weather conditions. We've lost—" The rest of the transmission was drowned out by a deafening crack of thunder. The cabin lights flickered and died. Felix's heart hammered against his ribs as the aircraft pitched violently to one side. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling, swaying like possessed marionettes. "Please," Felix whispered, fumbling to secure his mask with shaking hands. "Please, please, please." The plane entered a steep descent. Through the window, Felix caught glimpses of angry waves below, whitecaps visible even through the storm. His tablet went flying across the cabin, along with his briefcase and everything that wasn't bolted down. The temperature dropped rapidly as they lost altitude. In those terrifying moments, Felix thought about his life, his empty mansion, his lonely achievements, the family he'd never started. Was this how it would end? All his innovations and billions meaning nothing as the Pacific Ocean swallowed him whole? The impact, when it came, was explosive. Metal screamed against metal. Water rushed in through broken seams. Felix's world spun violently, his body jerking against the seatbelt like a rag doll. Something hard struck his head, and darkness claimed him. Consciousness returned slowly, accompanied by the gentle sound of waves lapping at shore. Felix's eyes fluttered open to find himself lying face down on warm sand. Every muscle in his body ached, and his clothes were stiff with dried salt water. The tropical sun beat down mercilessly on his back. He pushed himself up on trembling arms, spitting out sand and adjusting his miraculously intact glasses. Debris from the plane was scattered across the beach. Twisted metal, shredded seats, waterlogged luggage. But of the pilot and co-pilot, there was no sign. "Hello?" Felix called out, his voice hoarse. "Is anyone there? Can anybody hear me?" The only response was the cry of seabirds wheeling overhead. He struggled to his feet, swaying as dizziness threatened to overwhelm him. His expensive suit was in tatters, and he could feel bruises blooming across his body. A quick self-assessment revealed no broken bones, though a nasty gash on his forehead had left dried blood caked in his hairline. "Help!" He tried again, louder this time. "Please, somebody help!" Movement at the tree line caught his attention. Felix squinted against the bright sunlight, making out 3 tall figures emerging from the dense vegetation. As they drew closer, his breath caught in his throat. They were women, impossibly tall, each standing well over 6 feet, with skin as dark as polished ebony. They wore simple clothing that seemed handmade, and moved with a grace that seemed almost supernatural. Felix's vision began to blur around the edges. The stress, the crash, the injuries, and dehydration all caught up with him at once. His knees buckled beneath him. The last thing he felt was strong arms catching him before he hit the sand. Through half-closed eyes, he watched the beach tilt as the women lifted him with remarkable ease. Their voices, speaking in a language he didn't recognize, seemed to come from very far away. "Safe now," one of them said in heavily accented English. "Rest." Felix's head lolled against someone's shoulder as they carried him away from the wreckage, away from the beach, and into the mysterious interior of the island. The gentle swaying motion of their walk lulled him deeper into unconsciousness, and the world faded to black once more. The gentle rustling of palm fronds slowly filtered into Felix's consciousness. His eyes fluttered open to find himself lying on a soft mat woven from natural fibers, surrounded by the curved walls of an enormous circular hut. Sunlight streamed through gaps in the thatched roof, creating dancing patterns on the smooth wooden floor. In the distance, he could hear the steady rhythm of drums pulsing like a heartbeat, accompanied by the sound of children's laughter carried on the warm breeze. Felix pushed himself up to sitting, wincing at his stiff muscles. Someone had cleaned and bandaged his wounds, and his torn suit had been replaced with loose-fitting cotton garments. The doorway darkened as 3 towering figures entered, the same women who had found him on the beach. In the better light, Felix could now see them clearly. Each stood well over 6 feet tall, with proud bearing and kind eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. The woman in the center, her hair styled in intricate silver-streaked braids, spoke first. "I am Matron Keone," she said, her voice deep and melodious. "These are my sisters in spirit, Matron Amara and Matron Litha. Welcome to Harana." Matron Amara, wearing a bright yellow head wrap, stepped forward with a wooden cup. "Drink," she said softly. "It will help restore your strength." Her gentle demeanor reminded Felix of the nurses who had cared for him during childhood illnesses. The third woman, Matron Litha, stood with arms crossed, her muscular frame radiating protective energy. Though she didn't speak, her watchful gaze missed nothing. Felix accepted the cup with trembling hands, sipping the sweet-tasting liquid inside. "Thank you," he managed. "I'm Felix Ames. My plane. There was a storm." "We know of the crash," Keone said, settling onto a low stool beside his mat. "You are the first outsider to reach our shores in many years. Harana keeps herself hidden from the world, protected by treacherous reefs and endless storms. Amara brought a plate of fresh fruit and what appeared to be grilled fish. Eat slowly, she advised. Your body needs gentle care after such trauma. As Felix ate, the matriarchs explained their island's history. Harana had been founded centuries ago by their ancestors, women who had escaped slavery and found refuge on these distant shores. Through determination and ancient wisdom, they had built a thriving community that valued peace, tradition, and harmony with nature. We have chosen to remain apart from the outside world. Letha spoke for the first time, her voice carrying steel beneath its warmth. Our isolation is our protection. When Felix had finished eating and felt stronger, the matriarchs helped him to his feet. Come, Keone said, you should see our home. They guided him outside, and Felix blinked in the bright sunlight. The village spread out before him, a collection of similar round huts arranged in concentric circles, connected by packed earth paths lined with flowering plants. In the center stood a raised wooden platform, clearly an important gathering place. Children played between the buildings, their laughter bright and carefree. Felix noticed they were all boys, ranging from young children to teenagers. They stopped their games to stare at him with undisguised curiosity. A few of the bolder ones waved, and Felix found himself waving back. Adults went about their daily tasks, some weaving baskets, others tending gardens or preparing food. Most were women, and all shared the impressive height of the matriarchs. They regarded Felix with cautious expressions, though they nodded respectfully to their leaders. Your village is beautiful, Felix said sincerely. But I don't understand. How have you remained hidden for so long? And why did I survive when others have not? The three matriarchs exchanged significant looks. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Come to the council platform, Keone said, gesturing to the central structure. We have much to discuss about your arrival. It is no accident that Harana has allowed you to find us. As they walked toward the platform, Felix noticed more villagers gathering, drawn by some unspoken signal. The drums he had heard earlier grew louder, and torches were being lit against the approaching darkness. Whatever announcement the matriarchs planned to make, it was clearly of great importance to the entire community. The air grew heavy with anticipation as Felix climbed the steps behind the matriarchs, their long shadows stretching across the weathered wooden boards. Below, the assembled villagers waited in respectful silence, their faces glowing in the torchlight. Felix's heart pounded with equal parts anxiety and curiosity, knowing he was about to learn why fate had brought him to this extraordinary place. The evening air grew thick with anticipation as torches blazed to life around the council platform. Their flames cast dancing shadows across the weathered wood and illuminated the faces of gathered villagers. Felix stood uncertainly beside the three imposing matriarchs, his hands fidgeting with the hem of his torn shirt. Drums began to pulse in a steady rhythm that seemed to match Felix's racing heart. The sound echoed through the village, drawing more people from their huts. They moved with purpose, forming a respectful semicircle around the platform's base. Their expressions were solemn but curious as they gazed up at the stranger in their midst. Matron Keone stepped forward, her silver-streaked braids catching the torchlight. When she raised her hands, the drums fell silent. "People of Harana," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the gathering. "The gods have sent us a sign. For generations we have lived in blessed isolation, protected by the storms that guard our shores. But isolation has brought challenges we can no longer ignore." She paused, scanning the crowd. "Our numbers dwindle. Disease and accidents have taken too many of our men, leaving our boys without fathers, without teachers, without guides to show them the way into manhood. We have preserved our traditions, but the world beyond our shores grows more complex. Our children need more than we alone can give them." Felix shifted uncomfortably as dozens of eyes turned towards him. He could feel the weight of their hopes and fears pressing against his chest, making it hard to breathe. "The storms that protect us also take from us," Keone continued, "but today they have given something back." She turned and gestured to Felix. "This man was brought to our shores for a reason. Felix Ames is not just any survivor. He is an inventor, a builder, a man of knowledge and skill." Suddenly, all three matriarchs turned to face him directly. Keone's voice rang out with certainty. "You will give us sons." Felix's eyes went wide, and he stumbled backward, choking on air. What?" he sputtered, face flushing deep red as his mind raced with alarming implications. I can't." A ripple of gentle laughter spread through the crowd, breaking the ceremony's tension. Even the stern Matron Litha's lips curved in amusement. Matron Amara stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on Felix's shoulder. "Peace, brother," she said kindly. "We do not ask for what you fear. Our boys need a teacher, a guide to show them the skills their fathers never had the chance to pass on. They need someone to show them how to build, how to lead, how to hope for a future bigger than our island's shores." Felix looked down at the gathered faces, seeing them clearly now, dozens of boys among the women, ranging from small children to lanky teenagers. Their eyes shone with curiosity, and something that made his heart ache. Longing. "But I'm not—" Felix started to protest, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I'm not a teacher. I'm barely comfortable around people at all. I build things in my lab, alone. I'm not what you're looking for." "The gods disagree," Keone said firmly. "They chose to spare you, to bring you here." As Felix opened his mouth to object again, he felt something grab his leg. Looking down, he found a boy of about 10 years old clinging to him, staring up with enormous brown eyes. The child said nothing, but his silent plea was louder than any words could have been. "This is Jomo," Amara said softly. "He lost his father 2 years ago to a fishing accident. Since then he has spent countless hours trying to repair his father's old radio, hoping to make it work again." Felix felt his throat tighten as he looked at the boy. Without thinking, his hand came to rest on Jomo's shoulder. "A radio?" he asked quietly. "What kind?" Jomo's face lit up. "It's old," he said eagerly. "With tubes inside. I cleaned them, but it still won't make sounds." "Vacuum tubes," Felix murmured, already thinking about possible problems and solutions. He caught himself and shook his head, trying to remember why he needed to say no. "Stay," Keone said, reading his internal struggle. "Just for tonight. Think about what we ask. Look around our village, speak with our children. Then decide." Felix looked at Jomo's hopeful face, then at the other boys watching from below. He thought about his empty penthouse apartment, his lonely laboratory, the business meetings that filled him with dread. "One night," he agreed reluctantly. "I'll think about it." The drums began again, this time in a lighter rhythm. The gathering slowly dispersed, though many lingered to steal glances at their unusual visitor. Jomo remained firmly attached to Felix's side until Amara gently shooed him home. "Come," she said to Felix, "I'll show you to the guest hut." They walked through the village under a bright moon that turned everything silver. The torches were being extinguished one by one, but warm light still spilled from the hut's windows. Felix could hear women singing somewhere in the distance, their voices carrying on the night breeze. The guest hut was small but comfortable, with a clean sleeping mat and a window that faced the sea. As Amara left him at the doorway, Felix heard children laughing in the distance. He stood for a long moment, watching the moonlight play on the waves, feeling more lost and somehow more found than he had ever been in his life. Felix woke to unfamiliar bird song and the gentle rustling of palm fronds. Through the guest hut's window, golden morning light painted patterns on the woven walls. He had managed only a few hours of fitful sleep, his mind racing with thoughts of the villager's unexpected request and the weight of responsibility it carried. Running his fingers through his disheveled hair, Felix stepped outside into the warm, tropical morning. The air was thick with humidity, carrying the mingled scents of ocean salt and cooking fires. Village life was already bustling, women carrying baskets of fruit, children running errands, and the sound of work echoing from various corners of the settlement. A rhythmic clanking noise drew his attention to a clearing near the center of the village. There, a woman knelt beside a metal water pump, her movements precise and focused as she worked with obvious frustration. Even from a distance, Felix could tell she was striking. Tall and athletic, with close-cropped hair and skin the color of polished mahogany. She wore practical clothes, cargo pants and a tank top that revealed strong arms used to physical labor. Felix hesitated, his social anxiety flaring as it always did around new people, but the engineer in him couldn't resist the pull of a mechanical problem. Taking a deep breath, he approached the pump. "Good morning," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. The woman looked up, fixing him with an appraising stare that made him want to shrink back. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent, showing neither the deference he usually encountered due to his wealth, nor the warm welcome he'd received from others in the village. "So you're the billionaire they're all talking about?" she said, her tone neutral but carrying an edge. She sat back on her heels, wiping her hands on a rag. "I'm Nia." "Felix," he replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Felix Ames, is the pump giving you trouble?" Nia's eyebrow arched slightly. "Nothing I can't handle. I've been maintaining this village's infrastructure since I was old enough to hold a wrench." Felix nodded, shoving his hands in his pockets. "The seal looks worn," he observed carefully. "And from the sound, I'd guess the bearing assembly needs replacement." "Is that what your fancy computers told you?" Nia asked, standing to her full height. She was nearly as tall as him, and her presence was imposing. "Or did you actually get your hands dirty enough to learn that yourself?" Felix felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I started in a garage, actually, before the computers, before any of the success. Just me and broken machines that needed fixing." Nia studied him for a long moment. "And now? When was the last time you fixed something yourself instead of paying someone else to do it?" The question stung because it hit close to home. Felix had missed the simplicity of hands-on work, but success had gradually isolated him from it. "Too long," he admitted quietly. "That's what I thought." Nia picked up her wrench again. "So tell me, Felix Ames, how can a man who's never led a family teach our boys to be men? How can someone who hides in his laboratory show them how to be strong, how to be present, how to be part of a community?" Felix felt as if she'd punched him in the gut. All his insecurities rushed to the surface, his lonely childhood, his difficulty connecting with others, his fear of failing at meaningful relationships. But something in him refused to back down. "You're right," he said, his voice soft but steady. "I don't know how to be part of a family. I've spent most of my life alone, and yes, I hide in my work because it's easier than facing people. But I do know how to learn. I know how to try, how to fail, and how to keep going until I get it right." He gestured to the pump. "I can't teach the boys everything they need to know about being men, but I can teach them to solve problems, to build things that help others, to use their minds and hands to make their world better. Maybe Maybe we can learn the rest together." Nia's expression softened almost imperceptibly. She was quiet for a long moment, then held out the wrench. "Show me what you can do with this pump. Actions speak louder than words here on Harana." Felix took the tool, kneeling beside the mechanism. His hands remembered the work, even if they'd grown soft, and soon he was absorbed in the familiar dance of diagnosis and repair. Nia watched closely, occasionally offering guidance about the pump's specific quirks. As they worked together, she spoke again, her tone less confrontational but still serious. "Understand something. These boys have already lost too much. If you're going to do this, you need to be sure. Harana doesn't tolerate half-hearted effort or abandoned promises." Felix looked up from the pump, meeting her gaze directly. "I know what it's like to grow up feeling abandoned," he said quietly. "I wouldn't do that to them." Before Nia could respond, shadows fell across them. The three matriarchs, Keone, Amara, and Litha, stood watching their interaction with unreadable expressions. "It is time," Keone announced. "The boys are gathered. They wait to meet their teacher." Felix stood slowly, his hands grimy with work. Nia's challenge echoed in his mind, along with the weight of responsibility in Keone's words. His heart pounded with anxiety, but beneath it was a steady current of determination. These boys needed someone who would show up for them, who would try despite their fears. Maybe, just maybe, he could be that person. The matriarchs gestured for him to follow. As Felix moved to join them, he caught Nia's eye one last time. She gave him a small nod, not quite approval, but perhaps acknowledgement of his willingness to try. It wasn't much, but it felt like a beginning. The afternoon sun beat down on Felix's shoulders as he made his way towards the beach, following the sound of splashing and youthful laughter. His legs still felt shaky from the morning's confrontation with Nia, but each step carried him closer to what could be his new purpose. As he emerged from the tree line, the sight before him made him pause. About 15 boys of varying ages played in the shallows, their dark skin glistening in the sunlight as they practiced what looked like swimming drills. Some of the older ones helped the younger ones stay afloat, showing a brotherly care that touched something deep in Felix's heart. When they spotted him, the activity stopped. The boys gathered at the water's edge, whispering among themselves and stealing glances his way. Felix felt his social anxiety creeping up, but he forced himself to take a deep breath and walk forward. "Hello?" he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "I'm Felix. The matriarchs asked me to teach you some things." A boy he recognized as Jomo, the one who had clung to him the night before, stepped forward, water dripping from his shoulders. "Like what things?" he asked, his eyes bright with curiosity. Felix knelt in the sand to be at eye level with the younger boys. "Well, I know how to build things, fix things, make machines work better." He picked up a handful of sand, letting it run through his fingers. "Sometimes the best inventions start with just an idea and whatever materials you have around you." The boys exchanged interested looks. An older teen, maybe 15 or 16, crossed his arms. "Can you make something right now? To show us?" Felix glanced around the beach, his mind already working. He spotted some bamboo pieces, fallen coconuts, and various bits of driftwood. "Actually, yes. Would you like to help me build a water wheel?" The next hour passed in a blur of activity, as Felix guided the boys in constructing a simple water wheel using bamboo, palm fronds, and vines. He showed them how to split the bamboo, secure the paddles, and set up a basic axle system. The younger boys gathered materials while the older ones helped with construction, all of them hanging on his every word. As they worked, Felix found himself relaxing. This was familiar territory, solving problems, explaining concepts, seeing understanding dawn in eager eyes. The boys asked intelligent questions and showed remarkable resourcefulness in suggesting alternative materials or methods. Their simple machine was just taking shape when Felix noticed something on the horizon. A large ship sat anchored in the distance, its dark silhouette stark against the afternoon sky. Something about its presence felt wrong, like a shadow falling across their sunny moment. He wasn't the only one who noticed. The boys' chatter died down, their expressions growing serious as they stared out to sea. Before Felix could ask about it, he heard footsteps in the sand behind him. Nia and Litha approached, their faces tight with concern. Litha gathered the boys closer to shore, while Nia came to stand beside Felix. "Helix Mineral Corporation," she said quietly, nodding toward the ship. "They've been circling Harana for months now, like vultures waiting to strike." Felix frowned. "What do they want?" "Our cliffs." Litha joined them, her voice hard with anger. "They're rich with rare earth minerals, the kind their precious technology depends on. They've offered money, threatened legal action, tried to bribe officials on the mainland, but Harana has never surrendered to their kind, and we never will." Felix watched the ship, remembering similar corporate tactics he'd witnessed in his own business dealings. "The pressure's increasing, isn't it? That's why they're here now." Nia nodded grimly. "They think we're vulnerable because we've lost so many of our men. They don't understand that Harana's strength has always been in its unity, not its numbers." Looking back at the boys, now huddled together near their unfinished water wheel, Felix felt something shift inside him. These children needed more than just technical skills. They needed to know they weren't alone in facing what was coming. As the sun began to set, drums started echoing from the village. The sound seemed to vibrate through the ground itself, calling them home. But the boys were reluctant to leave their project unfinished. "We can continue tomorrow," Felix promised. "For now, let's build a fire, and I'll show you how the principles we learned today could be used for other machines." They gathered driftwood, and soon had a cheerful fire going. As darkness fell, Felix sat with the boys in a circle, using sticks to draw diagrams in the sand. He explained how water wheels could power generators, how simple machines could be combined to solve complex problems. The firelight danced across their faces as they leaned in, eager to learn more. The drumming continued in the distance, a steady heartbeat beneath their conversation. Felix found himself feeling more at peace than he had in years. Here, teaching these boys, he wasn't the awkward billionaire or the anxiety-ridden inventor. He was just someone sharing knowledge, making a difference in direct, tangible ways. He noticed Matron Keone approaching through the darkness. The boys quickly stood and bowed respectfully before heading back to the village, leaving Felix alone with her by the fire. "I'll stay," he said before she could speak. "I'll help teach the boys, help protect Harana however I can." Keone's face remained serious, but her eyes softened. "You understand this is not a small commitment? Harana needs more than just technical knowledge. We need someone who will stand with us, who will help our boys become men who can face whatever comes." "I understand," Felix replied, surprised by the strength in his own voice. "I want to be that person. I want to try." Just then, brilliant white light swept across the water as the ship's floodlights blazed to life. The sudden illumination felt like a warning, a reminder of the challenges ahead. But Felix didn't flinch. Instead, he stood straighter, feeling the sand beneath his feet and the steady rhythm of the drums behind him. He had found his purpose here on this island, with these people. Whatever came next, he would face it with them. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Felix made his way to the clearing, arms full of salvaged materials from his crashed plane. His heart beat faster with each step, anxiety mixing with determination. He'd never taught children before, and the responsibility felt enormous. The clearing was perfect for their makeshift workshop, a flat, grassy area surrounded by towering palms that provided patches of shade. Felix had spent hours before dawn arranging pieces of aircraft aluminum, wiring, and tools he'd managed to salvage. He'd also gathered local materials, bamboo, coconut shells, and various plant fibers the villagers used for weaving. As the boys began arriving, their excited chatter filled the morning air. Felix counted 12 of them, ranging from about 8 to 16 years old. Jomo was among the first, his eyes wide with curiosity as he examined the scattered materials. "Good morning," Felix said, his voice shakier than he'd hoped. "Today we're going to learn about how things work and how to build tools that can help your community." The boys settled into a rough semicircle, some sitting cross-legged on the grass, others squatting or kneeling. Felix held up a small solar panel he'd recovered from the plane's emergency kit. "This," he began, "can turn sunlight into power, like magic, but it's actually science." "Like the old panels behind the storage huts?" one of the older boys asked. "Exactly, but those aren't working anymore, are they?" Several boys shook their heads. Felix smiled, feeling more confident. "Well, by the end of today we're going to build something that does work. Solar-powered lanterns." He demonstrated how to connect wires to the panel, explaining the concepts in simple terms. The boys leaned forward, fascinated. But as the morning wore on, their natural energy began to overflow. 2 younger boys started a quiet game of tag behind the group. Another began fashioning a paper airplane from a precious piece of notebook paper Felix had intended for diagrams. Felix felt his anxiety rising. He was losing them. Just as he was about to call for order, a familiar voice rang out from the edge of the clearing. "Maybe we should show them why this matters," Nia said, walking towards them with purpose. She carried a bucket of murky water from the stream. "Felix, why don't we demonstrate how solar power can help clean water?" Relief flooded through him as Nia took control of the situation. She set up a simple filtration system, using materials they had on hand, and showed how a small pump powered by the solar panel could move water through it. "This is what your fathers and grandfathers used to maintain," she told the boys. "Now it's your turn to learn." The boys' attention snapped back immediately. Nia had a way of speaking that commanded respect while still showing warmth. She caught Felix's eye and nodded slightly, encouraging him to continue. Taking her cue, Felix divided the boys into small groups. "We'll start by building basic lanterns. These will help your families save on kerosene and provide better light for studying." As they worked, Jomo stayed close to Felix, asking questions about everything. "Why does the wire have to be copper? What makes the LED light up? Could we make bigger ones for the fishing boats?" Felix found himself relaxing as he answered each question, surprised by how much he enjoyed the boy's curiosity. It reminded him of his own childhood, endless hours spent taking apart old radios and computers. The morning blended into afternoon as they worked. Some boys struggled with the delicate wiring, while others showed natural talent for the technical work. Felix moved from group to group, guiding hands, explaining concepts, and most importantly, learning to communicate in ways they could understand. "Think of electricity like water," he told one frustrated group. "It needs a path to flow, just like the streams on your island." Nia continued to help throughout the day, translating Felix's technical terms into local analogies that made sense to the boys. She knew when to step in and when to let Felix handle things on his own. Their partnership felt natural, though Felix noticed she still watched him with careful consideration. As the sun began to sink towards the horizon, the first lanterns started coming together. The boys had decorated their creations with local materials, some wrapped in woven grass, others adorned with shells or carved patterns in the bamboo bases. "Let's test them," Felix announced, gathering everyone together. One by one, the lanterns were placed in the last rays of sunlight. The solar panels had been charging all day, and as darkness began to fall, small LED lights flickered to life. The boys' faces glowed with pride and wonder as their creations lit up the gathering dusk. "You did it," Felix said softly, watching as Jomo held his lantern up high, the light catching the intricate pattern he'd carved in the bamboo shade. "These are your first steps toward rebuilding what your island needs." The boys carried their lanterns home like precious treasures, chattering excitedly about what they would build next. Jomo lingered behind, helping Felix clean up the workspace. "Will you teach us more tomorrow?" he asked, carefully collecting leftover wire. "Every day," Felix promised, "as long as you want to learn." Later that night, Felix sat alone by a small fire outside his hut, one of the boys' lanterns casting a gentle glow beside him. He watched the flame dance and felt something he hadn't experienced in years: genuine pride. Not in his own achievements or innovations, but in what he had helped others accomplish. The lantern's light caught his attention, and he studied the careful craftsmanship of its young builder. These boys had so much potential, so much eagerness to learn and grow. For the first time since the crash, Felix felt truly certain he was exactly where he needed to be. The morning sun filtered through the palm fronds as Felix walked beside Nia along the village's winding paths. His eyes took in everything: women weaving baskets from palm leaves, children carrying water from the well, elders teaching youngsters to repair fishing nets. "Our village may seem simple to you," Nia said, noticing his careful observation. "But every person here has a role. It's how we've survived for generations." Felix nodded, watching an elderly woman struggle with a broken cooking pot. Without thinking, he veered towards her. "May I help?" he asked softly. The woman looked up, surprised. Her weather-worn face creased with skepticism, but she handed him the pot. Felix examined the crack along its base, then pulled a small tool kit from his pocket, one of the few things that had survived the crash. "The metal can be sealed," he explained, working carefully. "If we heat it just right and add this compound." His hands moved with practiced precision, and within minutes the pot was whole. Again. The elder woman tested it with wonder, filling it with water. Not a single drop leaked. She touched Felix's arm gently, speaking words he didn't understand, but whose meaning was clear in her smile. As they continued through the village, more people approached with broken items: a radio that had stopped working, a solar lamp that wouldn't charge, even a child's beloved toy boat that had split in two. Felix fixed each one, with Nia translating when needed. "You're good with your hands," she admitted as they walked, "but being part of Harana means more than fixing things." Around midday, they reached the clearing where the matriarchs waited. Keone stepped forward, her presence commanding attention. "Today you will teach alone," she announced. "Show us what you can offer our sons." Felix's heart raced, but he steadied himself as the boys gathered around. He noticed Jomo at the front, eager as always, and drew strength from the boys' enthusiasm. "Today we're going to learn about radio waves," Felix began, holding up the broken radio he'd been given earlier. "They're like ripples in a pond, but invisible." He opened the radio's case, showing them the circuit board inside. The boys leaned in, fascinated. Felix explained each component, using analogies they would understand, comparing resistors to dam walls controlling water flow, capacitors to storage containers. "Now, who wants to help me fix it?" he asked. Hands shot up immediately. Felix guided them through the repair, letting them take turns with the soldering iron, teaching them to identify broken connections. When they finally connected the power, static crackled through the speaker. Jomo turned the tuning dial carefully, and suddenly music filled the air, a distant station playing traditional songs. The boys cheered, jumping up and down, their excitement infectious. "You did this!" Felix told them, grinning. "You brought music back to this radio." The matriarchs exchanged approving looks. Letha nodded slowly, a smile playing at her lips. "Perhaps," she said, "you have more to teach than we first thought." As the afternoon faded into evening, Nia approached Felix again. "We're having a special dinner tonight," she said. "The whole village gathers once a week to share food and stories. You should join us." The central clearing had been transformed. Woven mats covered the ground, and cooking fires dotted the area. Delicious smells filled the air. Grilled fish, roasted vegetables, and fruits Felix had never seen before. When he sat down, the elders began bringing him special dishes, foods reserved for honored guests. There was fish wrapped in banana leaves, sweet purple tubers, and a soup that seemed to glow with spices. "These are dishes we share with those we consider family," Nia explained quietly, sitting beside him. "It means they're beginning to accept you." Felix's throat tightened with emotion. He'd never experienced anything like this. This sense of belonging, of being valued for more than his wealth or inventions. As night fell, the village gathered around a central fire. The eldest woman began telling stories, her voice rising and falling like music. Though Felix couldn't understand the words, he felt their power. One by one, the younger children drifted off to sleep. The boys from his class fought to stay awake, but eventually succumbed. Felix felt a weight against his side and looked down to find Jomo fast asleep, curled up next to him like a son seeking his father's protection. The firelight danced across the sleeping children's faces, and Felix felt something shift inside him. Here, surrounded by the village's warmth, with Jomo trustingly asleep beside him, he finally understood what the matriarchs had meant. They weren't just asking him to teach skills, they were asking him to help build a future, to be part of something larger than himself. He glanced at Nia across the fire. She was watching him with a thoughtful expression, as if seeing him truly for the first time. When their eyes met, she gave him a small nod of acknowledgement, and Felix knew he'd passed some unspoken test. The stories continued into the night, weaving tales of the island's past with hopes for its future. Felix sat quietly, one hand resting protectively on Jomo's shoulder, feeling more at peace than he had in years. Around him, the village breathed as one, elders telling stories, parents cradling children, fires crackling with warmth. Felix realized he was no longer just an outsider who had washed up on their shore. Somehow, without him noticing, he had begun to become part of Harana's heart. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Felix spread his diagrams across a wooden table in the village center. His hands moved quickly, sketching additions to the plans he'd worked on through the night. The salvaged pieces from his crashed plane lay sorted nearby, solar cells from the wings, wiring from the navigation systems, and various electronic components he'd carefully preserved. Nia approached, wiping sleep from her eyes. "You're up early," she said, studying the drawings. "These look complicated." "Not as complicated as you might think," Felix replied, his excitement making him forget his usual hesitation. "With what we salvaged and the resources here, we can build a small solar power station. It could light up the whole village." The boys began arriving, drawn by the activity. Jomo pressed close to Felix's side, pointing at the diagrams. "What's this part?" he asked. "That's the inverter. It changes the sun's power into electricity we can use," Felix explained. He looked up at the gathering crowd. "If we work together, we can finish this in a week." Nia crossed her arms, considering. "A week? That's ambitious." "We can do it," Felix said with newfound confidence. "I'll show you how." The first day was devoted to preparing the solar panel frames. Felix taught the boys to measure and cut bamboo poles, precisely, creating sturdy supports that would hold the precious solar cells. The work was meticulous, but the boys showed surprising patience. "Like this?" Jomo asked, holding up a perfectly squared frame. Felix grinned. "Exactly like that. You're a natural." On the second day, they began mounting the salvaged solar cells. Felix demonstrated how to handle the delicate components, showing them how to wire the cells together in series. Nia proved especially skilled at the detailed work, her fingers steady and sure. "My father taught me to fix the old generators," she explained, carefully soldering a connection. "This isn't so different." The third day brought challenges as they worked to build the power storage system. Using modified batteries from the plane and locally sourced materials, they created a bank that could store the sun's energy for nighttime use. "The batteries are like cups," Felix explained to the boys. "During the day, we fill them with sunshine. At night, we can pour that power back out as electricity." The fourth day was spent running wiring through the village. The boys climbed like monkeys, stringing cables between huts while Felix and Nia installed simple switches and light fixtures. The entire village pitched in, with elders providing traditional knowledge about the best routes and methods for securing the lines. On the fifth day, they built the control station, a small shelter to house the inverter and monitoring equipment. Felix taught the older boys how to read the gauges and manage the power flow. Their eyes shone with pride as they mastered each new concept. The sixth day was devoted to testing and adjustments. Each connection was checked 3 times, each component verified. Felix wouldn't risk failure, not when the village had invested so much hope in the project. As the 7th day dawned, anticipation filled the air. The entire village gathered to watch as Felix made the final connections. He stepped back, took a deep breath, and looked at the expectant faces around him. "Ready?" he asked. Jomo grabbed his hand. "Ready." Felix threw the switch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, one by one, lights began to flicker on throughout the village. Bulbs that hadn't glowed in a generation came to life, casting warm light across amazed faces. The crowd erupted in cheers and screams of joy. The celebration began immediately. Drums appeared as if by magic, their rhythm matching the pounding of Felix's heart. People danced through the village, marveling at the lights. Children ran from hut to hut, switching lights on and off in delight. The feast that followed was unlike anything Felix had ever seen. Tables groaned under the weight of traditional dishes. The air filled with the smell of grilled fish, tropical fruits, and sweet breads. Everyone wanted to share their food with him, to thank him in their own way. As the sun set, the village glowed with electric light for the first time in decades. The 3 matriarchs stood, commanding immediate silence. Keone reached for Felix's hand, raising it high. "Look around you," she called out, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "See how our village shines. For too long, we feared our sons would be lost to the modern world. But now," she squeezed Felix's hand, "Harana has sons again, because of you." The crowd erupted in cheers. Nia caught his eye across the gathering, giving him a smile that made his heart skip. The boys surrounded him, hugging him tightly, their faces shining with pride and joy. Later that night, Felix stood alone under the lantern-lit sky. The village glowed below him, each point of light representing a connection, not just of electricity but of trust, of belonging, of family. The drums still played softly in the distance, a heartbeat for their renewed hope. He looked down at his hands, calloused now from a week of hard work. These same hands had once only known keyboards and corporate boardrooms. Now they had helped build something real, something that mattered. For the first time in his life, Felix felt truly, completely at home. The joy that filled him wasn't the fleeting happiness of business success or technological breakthrough. It was deeper, more profound. It was the joy of belonging, of being needed, of making a difference in lives he had come to cherish. Above him, stars twinkled alongside the new electric lights of Harana, and Felix smiled, his heart full to bursting with a happiness he had never known possible. The morning sun had barely crept over the horizon when the drums shattered Felix's peaceful sleep. These weren't the gentle, rhythmic beats of celebration from the night before. These were sharp, urgent strikes that made his heart race. He bolted upright in his bed, the thin blanket falling away as the alarm drums continued their ominous warning. Felix stumbled to his feet, quickly pulling on his clothes. Outside, the village was already stirring like a disturbed ant-hill. People rushed from their huts, their faces tight with worry as they looked towards the beach. The drums grew louder, more insistent. "Felix!" Nia's voice cut through the morning air. She was running toward him, her usual composed demeanor replaced by barely contained panic. "They're back. The mining company. They've brought boats this time." Together they rushed to the beach overlook. The large ship that had been lurking offshore days ago had returned, its dark hull even more menacing in the morning light. But now, 4 smaller boats were cutting through the waves toward shore, their engines leaving white trails in the water. "We need to hide the boys," Nia said, grabbing Felix's arm. "Now." They sprinted back to the village, where the matriarchs were already organizing the community. Keone's powerful voice rang out over the commotion, giving clear instructions to different groups. When she saw Felix and Nia, she nodded grimly. "Take them to the high caves," she commanded. "Quick, before the boats land." Felix and Nia gathered the boys, who were scared but trying to be brave. Little Jomo clung to Felix's hand as they hurried through the village. "Are the bad people coming?" he whispered. "Don't worry," Felix assured him, though his own stomach was churning with anxiety. "We just need to stay quiet and hidden for a little while." They led the group of boys up a hidden path into the hills, to a series of caves the villagers used for storage. The older boys helped the younger ones climb, while Felix and Nia made sure no one fell behind. Once inside, Nia positioned them deep in the cave system. "Stay here," she instructed firmly. "No matter what you hear, stay quiet and hidden until one of us comes for you." Felix squeezed Jomo's shoulder before turning to leave. The boy's eyes were wide with fear, but he gave a determined nod. It broke Felix's heart to leave them, but they had to get back to the village. When they returned, the mining company representatives had already landed. 5 men in expensive suits stood on the beach, looking completely out of place against the natural beauty of Harana. Behind them, several security guards in tactical gear waited by the boats, their presence an unspoken threat. The matriarchs faced them with regal dignity, Keone, Amara, and Litha standing like mountains, unmovable and proud. The village elders flanked them, creating a wall of resistance. A man in the center of the group stepped forward, his polished shoes sinking slightly in the sand. "We've been patient," he announced, his voice carrying the practiced smoothness of corporate power. "But this has gone on long enough. The mineral deposits in your cliffs are too valuable to ignore." "Our answer remains the same," Keone replied, her voice steady and strong. "These cliffs are sacred to our people. They are not for sale." The man's smile turned cold. "I don't think you understand. We're not here to buy anymore. We're here to inform you that our company has been granted mining rights by the government. This island will be developed with or without your cooperation." Felix stepped forward, anger burning in his chest. "You can't do this. These people have lived here for generations. You have no right." The man cut him off with a dismissive wave. "And who might you be?" "Felix Ames," he said, standing straighter. "And I? The missing billionaire himself. We wondered where you'd crashed." The man's smile widened. "Excellent. Then you understand business. Surely you can explain to these people that progress can't be stopped for the sake of tradition. Felix felt his face flush with anger. What I understand is that you're threatening innocent people. If you think, Mr. Ames... The man interrupted again. Whatever game you're playing at here, I suggest you stay out of it. This doesn't concern you. He turned back to the matriarchs. You have 3 days to accept our terms for voluntary relocation. After that, we do this the hard way. The security guards shifted their stance, hands resting meaningfully on their weapons. The message was clear. We will not be moved, Litha declared, her voice ringing with authority. The man shrugged. Then we'll return with proper persuasion. He gestured to his team, and they began walking back to their boats. Over his shoulder he called, 3 days. The village watched in tense silence as the boats departed. Only when there were specks on the horizon did people begin to move again, but the atmosphere remained heavy with fear. Felix felt sick. He paced the beach as Nia brought the boys back from the caves, his mind racing with guilt. The solar lights he'd helped install now felt like beacons, drawing unwanted attention to the island. His presence here had probably accelerated the mining company's timeline. As evening fell, worry spread through the village like a virus. Parents held their children close. The usual sounds of laughter and play were replaced by hushed conversations and worried glances towards the sea. Felix couldn't bear to join the community dinner. Instead, he stood at the edge of the water, watching darkness settle over the ocean. The waves lapped at his feet, their gentle rhythm mocking the turmoil in his heart. This is my fault, he whispered to the night. I made them too visible. I brought this down on them. Behind him, the village's lights twinkled. Lights he had helped install with such hope and pride just yesterday. Now they seemed to taunt him, reminding him that every step forward could have unintended consequences. The dark sea stretched endlessly before him, hiding the threats he knew were gathering. Somewhere out there, powerful men were making plans, counting on the villagers' fear and isolation. Felix stared into the darkness, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, knowing that trouble was coming to this peaceful shore, and he had helped bring it. The evening air hung heavy with anticipation as Felix and Nia worked on the solar lights near the village center. 2 days of waiting had frayed everyone's nerves, making even simple tasks feel weighted with dread. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in deep purples and oranges that would normally have been beautiful. Felix's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted a connection in one of the light fixtures. This wire's getting worn, he murmured, more to break the silence than anything else. We should probably replace it soon. Nia nodded, her usual confident demeanor subdued. There's some spare copper in the storage hut. We can get it tomorrow. She paused, then added softly, if we're still here tomorrow. The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken fears. Felix opened his mouth to respond when the first explosion rocked the night. Boom! The sound echoed off the cliffs, followed immediately by another. Boom! Boom! The ground shook beneath their feet as orange flashes lit up the darkness. Screams erupted from all directions as villagers poured from their homes. The cliffs! Someone shouted. They're attacking the cliffs! Felix's heart stopped as he saw flames beginning to lick up the side of the sacred rocks. Dark figures moved through the shadows, their forms illuminated by more explosions. The mercenaries had returned, just as promised, and they'd chosen darkness as their cover. The solar station! Nia cried out suddenly, pointing toward the clearing where they'd built their power source. Flames were already consuming the wooden framework around the panels. The sight of his creation burning sent a physical pain through Felix's chest. People ran in all directions, some toward the fires with buckets of water, others gathering children and elderly to safety. The matriarchs' voices boomed over the chaos, trying to organize the response, but the attackers had chosen their moment well. The darkness and surprise had thrown everything into confusion. Felix sprinted towards the solar station, Nia close behind him. The heat hit them like a wall as they approached. Several of the boys who had helped build it were already there, desperately trying to save what they could. "Jomo, get back!" Felix shouted, seeing the young boy too close to the flames. "It's not safe." "But we have to save it!" Jomo cried, tears streaming down his face. "We built it together!" The words struck Felix like physical blows. He had helped these children create something beautiful, given them hope and pride, only to watch it burn. More explosions rocked the night as the mercenaries continued their assault on the cliffs, each blast feeling like another failure. For nearly 2 hours, the village fought the fires. They formed bucket chains, used wet blankets, and did everything possible to contain the destruction. The mercenaries had disappeared as quickly as they came, leaving only devastation in their wake. When the last flames finally died down, the full extent of the damage became clear. The solar station was a charred skeleton. Parts of the sacred cliffs were blackened and crumbling. But worst of all was the defeat Felix saw in the eyes of the villagers, especially the children. The boys gathered around the ruins of their project, some crying openly, others just staring in shock. Felix couldn't bear to look at them. Every tear felt like an accusation. If he hadn't come here, if he hadn't made the island more visible, if he hadn't given them hope only to have it destroyed. Nia approached him as he stood apart from the others, staring at the destruction. "Felix," she said softly, putting a hand on his arm. "This isn't your fault. You gave us light, gave our boys purpose. Those men, they're the ones who did this." But Felix could barely hear her through the roaring in his head. The pride he'd felt just days ago when the lights first came on now felt like a cruel joke. He'd thought he could protect these people, thought he could be something more than the lonely, anxious man he'd always been. But in the end, he'd only made things worse. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though Nia had already turned to help console the boys. "I'm so sorry." The village slowly quieted as people returned to their homes, though few would sleep that night. The air still smelled of smoke and fear. Felix stood rooted to the spot, unable to face going back to his hut where he knew the boys would look for him, seeking comfort he didn't know how to give. Instead, as the stars emerged above the smoke-tinged sky, he turned and walked away from the village. His feet carried him into the trees, away from the destruction he felt responsible for, away from the trust he'd broken, away from the family he'd dared to dream he might have found. The darkness swallowed him as he disappeared into the forest, his guilt weighing heavier with each step. Behind him, the damaged solar lights flickered weakly, casting uncertain shadows on the path he left behind. The morning sun crept over the horizon, painting the eastern sky in soft pinks and golds, but Felix barely noticed its beauty. He sat motionless on the cliff's edge, his legs dangling over the rocky face where the mining company had done their damage. His clothes still smelled of smoke, and his eyes burned from lack of sleep. He hadn't moved from this spot for hours, watching the stars fade and the dawn break. Below him, the ocean crashed against the rocks in an endless rhythm. The same waters that had brought him here now seemed to mock him with their constancy. Everything he touched seemed to bring destruction. The solar station, the children's hope, the village's peace, all of it lay in ashes because he'd dared to think he could be more than what he was. The sound of footsteps crunching on gravel reached his ears, but Felix didn't turn around. He knew who it would be. The matriarchs always seemed to know where to find people when they were needed most. "The morning air bites sharp today." Keone's deep voice came from behind him. Without waiting for a response, she lowered herself to sit on his left. Amara settled on his right, while Litha remained standing, her powerful presence like a shield at his back. For several long minutes they sat in silence, watching the sun climb higher. Felix could feel their patience, their strength. It made him feel even smaller. "I should never have stayed," he finally whispered, his voice rough from the night's smoke. "Everything I built just gave those men a bigger target." Amara hummed softly. Should a mother never love her child because loss might come? Should we never plant because storms might destroy? Felix turned to look at her, surprised by the gentle sadness in her voice. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon, but they seemed to see something far beyond it. "I had 3 sons," she continued, her words carrying on the morning breeze. "Strong boys, smart boys. The oldest was teaching the youngest to fish when the first mining ships came. They thought they could protect our waters." She paused, drawing a deep breath. "The company's boats had bigger engines, sharper propellers. My boys never had a chance." Felix felt his throat tighten. He'd never heard this story before. Litha's voice came next, strong but lined with old pain. "My husband and brother led our warriors when the companies first tried to take the cliffs. 20 years ago now, they had spears against guns." She let out a bitter laugh. "We buried them in the sacred ground, where the solar station now stands, or stood. My own children." Keone spoke, her words measured and heavy. "Died of fever when the companies poisoned our water source. 3 little ones in 1 week." She turned to look directly at Felix, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "We all carry losses, Felix Ames, but we carry them together." The weight of their stories pressed against Felix's chest, making it hard to breathe. He'd known the island had suffered, but hearing the personal cost, understanding the depth of pain these strong women carried, it changed something inside him. "How do you keep going?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How do you keep fighting when it hurts so much?" Amara reached out and took his hand in hers. Her palm was warm and calloused, a healer's hand that had tended countless wounds. "Because that is what family does," she said simply. "We stand up, we rebuild, we love again." "But I'm not." Felix started to protest, but Litha cut him off. "Not what? Not family." She moved to stand in front of him, her impressive height blocking the sun. "Those boys look at you like you hung the stars. You taught them to build, to create, to hope. That makes you family more than any blood could." "A son does not run from home," Keone said firmly, placing her hand on his shoulder. "And you are our son now, whether you chose it or not. The question is, will you choose to stay one?" Felix looked at each of them in turn, Keone with her quiet wisdom, Amara with her healing touch, Litha with her fierce strength. He thought of the boys' faces as they built the solar station, their pride when the lights first came on. He thought of Nia's growing trust, of Jomo's constant questions and eager smile. The shame that had driven him to this cliff began to shift, transforming into something else, something that felt like responsibility, like belonging, like love. Slowly, deliberately, Felix pushed himself to his feet. He dusted off his pants, straightened his shoulders, and took a deep breath of the morning air. The matriarchs rose with him, forming a circle of protection and strength. "The solar station," he said, his voice growing stronger. "We can rebuild it, better this time, and we can protect it." Amara smiled, the expression lighting up her whole face. "There's our son," she said softly. Together they turned away from the cliff and began walking back towards the village. The sun was fully up now, casting their shadows long behind them. Felix felt the weight of the matriarch's stories settle into his heart, not as a burden, but as a foundation. They had endured so much, lost so much, and still they stood strong. Still they loved. Still they hoped. He would do no less. With each step back towards the village, Felix felt his resolve hardening. The mining company had meant to break their spirit, but they had only succeeded in showing him what real family looked like, what real strength was, what real love could survive. Felix's footsteps grew heavier as he approached the village, the matriarchs walking beside him like pillars of strength. The sound of children's voices reached him first. Then he saw them. A dozen boys stood at the village entrance, their faces lighting up as they spotted him. "Teacher Felix!" Jomo shouted, breaking away from the group. The others followed, running toward him with open arms and bright smiles. Felix barely had time to brace himself before they collided with him, small arms wrapping around his waist and legs. "We thought you left us," one of the younger boys said, his voice muffled against Felix's shirt. "I'm sorry I worried you," Felix replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I needed some time to think, but I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere." Nia stood a few yards away, arms crossed, but relief evident in her expression. "Good," she said simply, "because we have work to do." Felix nodded, gently disentangling himself from the boys. "Gather everyone," he said. "I have an idea." Within the hour, the village's main meeting area was filled with people. The matriarchs sat in their traditional places, while Nia and the older villagers formed a semicircle. The boys sat cross-legged on the ground, looking up at Felix with complete trust. "The mining company thinks they can intimidate us with their technology and weapons," Felix began, his voice carrying across the quiet crowd. "But we have something they don't expect: ingenuity and unity. We can use what we have to create a defense system that doesn't rely on violence." He pulled out some rough sketches he'd made in the dirt earlier. "First, we'll build a network of floodlights, powered by hand cranks so they can't disable them by cutting power. When their boats approach at night, we'll light up the entire coastline. No more sneaking around in darkness." Excited murmurs rippled through the crowd. Nia stepped forward, examining the drawings. "We can use salvaged parts from your plane crash for the lights," she said. "And the boys already know how to build basic circuits." "Exactly," Felix smiled. "Next, we'll create a system of alarms. Again, crank-powered, positioned strategically around the island. If anyone tries to land, they'll trigger a warning that the whole village can hear." "Like our drums," one of the elders noted. "But louder." "Yes," Felix agreed. "But the most important part is this." He held up another sketch. "A broadcasting tower. We'll build it high enough to reach beyond the island, using parts from the plane's radio and some modifications. When the company comes back, we'll broadcast everything they do, their threats, their destruction, to the whole world. They can't hide their actions if everyone's watching." The matriarchs exchanged approving looks. Keone spoke up, her voice carrying authority. "How long will this take?" "If everyone helps, we can have it ready in 5 days." Felix replied. "We'll need everyone's skills, the boys' knowledge of circuits, Nia's engineering expertise, the elders' knowledge of the island's best positions." "And the signal fires?" Amara asked. "Special ones," Felix explained. "Using dry seaweed and certain minerals from the cliffs, we can create colored smoke that's visible for miles, but won't give away our exact positions. They'll help coordinate our defense across the island." The next 5 days passed in a blur of activity. On the first day, teams spread across the island, marking positions for the alarm systems and gathering materials. The boys worked enthusiastically, their small hands perfect for delicate wiring work. The second day saw the installation of the first floodlights. Felix and Nia worked side by side, her practical knowledge complementing his theoretical expertise. The lights were tested at dusk, illuminating the coastline like artificial stars. By the third day, the alarm system was taking shape. The cranks were crafted from salvaged plane parts and local hardwood, designed to be easily operated by even the youngest villagers. The sound they produced was distinct, a high-pitched wail that carried across the water without revealing its source. The fourth day was dedicated to the signal fires. Felix worked with the elders, learning which combinations of local materials produced different-colored smoke. They positioned the fire pits strategically, creating a network of communication points across the island. On the fifth day, they raised the broadcast tower. It stood tall against the sky, a symbol of their resistance and ingenuity. Felix had modified the plane's radio equipment, increasing its range and power. Solar panels salvaged from the damaged station would keep it running, with hand cranks as backup. As dusk approached on that final day, Felix stood at the tower's base, running final tests. The equipment hummed to life, picking up distant radio chatter, proof that their signal could reach the outside world. Around him, villagers were completing the last connections, securing cables and double-checking systems. Nia approached, carrying tools and wearing a satisfied expression. "It's ready," she said. "Everything's connected and working. The whole island is wired for defense." Felix nodded, looking out over their work. Floodlights stood ready at strategic points along the coast. Alarm stations were positioned and tested. Signal fire pits waited with their specially prepared fuel. And above it all, the broadcast tower reached toward the darkening sky, ready to share their story with the world. The boys gathered around him, their faces proud and determined. Jomo touched the tower's base reverently. "Now we can protect our home," he said. "Together." Felix agreed, placing his hand on the boy's shoulder. The matriarchs approached as the last light faded from the sky. Keone smiled at the sight of their defenses. "You have given us more than protection," she said. "You have given us hope." Felix turned on the broadcasting equipment one final time, listening to the steady hum that meant it was working perfectly. The system was ready. The island was ready. Whatever came next, they would face it as a family. The morning sun had barely risen when the drums began their warning rhythm. Felix rushed from his hut, his heart pounding as he saw villagers pointing towards the horizon. 3 boats were approaching, sleek, military-style vessels cutting through the waves with determined speed. "They're back," Nia said, appearing at his side. Her voice was steady, but her hands were clenched tight. "Just as we expected." Felix nodded, forcing himself to remain calm. "Everyone knows what to do. Get the children to the safe spots we prepared. I'll start the systems." As the village mobilized with practiced precision, Felix ran to the control station they'd built near the center of the island. His fingers flew over the switches and dials, checking connections one last time. Through the trees, he could see the boats growing closer, their engines growling against the peaceful morning air. "Broadcasting equipment ready?" he called out. "All set," Nia responded, adjusting the camera angles. They had positioned cameras strategically around the landing areas, hidden but with clear views. Environmental groups and news stations are standing by. The moment anything happens, they'll see it all. The matriarchs gathered the villagers, positioning them exactly as they had practiced. Everyone wore their brightest traditional clothing, creating a striking visual statement. They stood proud but peaceful, no weapons in sight. The boats reached the shallows, and armed men began jumping into the water, splashing toward shore. Their leader, a tall man with a scarred face, walked confidently onto the beach. He carried no visible weapons but radiated threat in every movement. "This is your last chance," he shouted. "Clear out now, or we'll remove you by force. The company's claiming these cliffs one way or another." Felix took a deep breath and pressed the first button. Instantly, Massive floodlights blazed to life all around the beach, eliminating every shadow. The mercenaries stumbled, squinting in the sudden brightness. Their leader's face contorted with confusion and anger. "What is this?" he demanded. Felix activated the alarm system next. A high, piercing tone cut through the air, not deafening, but impossible to ignore. It was the signal for the villagers to begin. The entire community moved as one, joining hands in a great circle. Their voices rose in a traditional song of protection, the sound carrying clearly over the alarm's steady pulse. The children, safely hidden, added their own voices from their secure locations. "You are being recorded," Felix announced through the speaker system they'd installed. His voice echoed across the beach. "Every action you take here is being broadcast live to environmental organizations and news networks worldwide." Nia's fingers danced across their makeshift broadcasting console, confirming the signals were going out strong and clear. On their monitoring screen, they could see their footage appearing on major news websites, complete with location tags and context. The mercenaries began looking around nervously, suddenly aware of the cameras catching their every move. Some lowered their weapons, clearly uncomfortable with the exposure. "No one's watching!" their leader snarled, but his voice wavered. He pulled out his phone, and his face paled as he saw the trending notifications already appearing. The villagers continued their song, standing peaceful but unmovable. The matriarch stepped forward, their presence commanding respect. Keone's voice rang out, clear and strong. "The world sees you now. They see who threatens us, who would destroy our home for profit." Social media notifications began pinging rapidly on the broadcasting equipment. Hashtags about Harana were trending. Environmental groups were already issuing statements of support. The mercenaries' phones buzzed constantly as their company's name began appearing in global headlines. The leader's radio crackled. After a brief conversation, his face twisted with frustration. "Pull back," he ordered his men. "Back to the boats, now!" The mercenaries retreated through the shallows, practically tripping over themselves in their haste to escape the lights and cameras. The boat's engines roared to life, kicking up white spray as they turned sharply away from shore. Felix kept the lights and cameras on until the boats reached their ship. Through binoculars, they could see frantic activity on the larger vessel's deck. Within minutes, it was raising anchor, turning its bow away from Harana. The villagers maintained their circle, singing until the ship was a distant speck on the horizon. Only then did Felix power down the floodlights, though he kept the broadcasting equipment running, just in case. For a moment, complete silence fell over the beach. Then someone let out a whoop of joy. Another voice joined in, then another, until the entire village erupted in celebration. People were laughing, crying, hugging each other. The children emerged from their hiding spots, running to join the celebration. Nia threw her arms around Felix, tears streaming down her face. "We did it," she whispered. "We really did it." The matriarchs approached, their own eyes glistening. "This victory belongs to all of us," Keone declared, her voice thick with emotion. "To old wisdom and new knowledge, working as one." Felix felt small hands grab him and looked down to see Jomo beaming up at him. "The lights worked!" the boy exclaimed. "Just like you taught us." Around them, villagers were dancing on the beach, their tears of joy mixing with the sand beneath their feet. The morning sun seemed to shine brighter than ever, glinting off the solar panels and broadcasting equipment that had helped save their home. Felix watched as the celebration continued, feeling a deep sense of peace settle over him. This wasn't just a victory over force and greed. It was a triumph of community, of family, of light over darkness. The people of Harana had protected their home not with violence, but with truth and unity. As the singing and dancing continued around him, Felix saw the matriarchs gathering the children, leading them in a traditional dance of gratitude. The broadcast equipment continued to hum softly, now sharing their celebration with the world that had witnessed their stand. The morning sun painted Harana in shades of gold as villagers gathered in the central clearing. The sweet scent of burning sage and fragrant flowers filled the air, while drums kept a gentle, steady rhythm. After yesterday's victory, the entire island seemed to pulse with renewed life and purpose. Felix stood nervously at the edge of the gathering, watching as the matriarchs prepared the ceremonial space. Nia appeared beside him, wearing a flowing dress adorned with traditional patterns. "You look worried," she said softly. "Don't be. Today is about gratitude and new beginnings." The drums grew louder as Keone raised her hands, calling everyone to attention. The villagers formed a wide circle, with the children sitting cross-legged at the front. Jomo caught Felix's eye and grinned, practically bouncing with excitement. "Come forward," Amara called to Felix, her voice carrying across the clearing. As Felix stepped into the circle, Litha approached carrying a folded cloth of deep blue and gold, the sacred colors of Harana. The fabric shimmered in the morning light, its intricate patterns telling stories of the island's history. "This cloth," Keone explained, her voice rich with emotion, "has been worn only by those who have proven themselves true guardians of our people, those who protect not just our present, but our future." The matriarchs carefully draped the cloth over Felix's shoulders. It felt surprisingly light, yet he could sense the weight of its significance. Tears pricked at his eyes as he remembered the lonely man who had crashed on these shores, so different from who he had become. "From this day forward," Amara proclaimed, "you shall be known as the steward of Harana's future, not because you saved us with technology, but because you showed our children the power of combining wisdom with knowledge, courage with compassion." The villagers erupted in cheers and applause. The boys whooped with particular enthusiasm, making Felix laugh despite his emotional state. When he looked up, he saw Nia watching him with an expression that made his heart skip. She walked toward him deliberately, her steps matching the drum beats. Without hesitation, she took his hand in hers. Her fingers were calloused from work, but gentle, and they fit perfectly between his own. "You proved me wrong," she said, loud enough for others to hear. "I questioned whether a man who never had a family could teach our boys to be men, but you showed us that family isn't just what we're born into. It's what we choose to build together." The touch of her hand sent warmth spreading through Felix's chest. This wasn't just acknowledgement of his bravery. It was recognition of something deeper, the heart he'd always doubted he had. "Teacher Felix! Teacher Felix!" The boys' voices rang out as they rushed forward as one. Jomo led them, carrying something covered in woven leaves. "We made this for you," Jomo said proudly, carefully unwrapping their gift. Felix's breath caught as the leaves fell away. In his hands was a wooden statue, clearly carved with great care and attention. It showed a tall figure, surrounded by smaller ones, all reaching upward together. The base was inscribed with symbols he recognized as meaning "Father Teacher." "The older boys carved it," Jomo explained, "but we all helped design it. See how the big figure is teaching, but also learning. That's you!" Felix ran his fingers over the smooth wood, touched beyond words. Each detail showed such thought and love, from the teaching pose to the expressions of joy on the smaller figures' faces. "Thank you," he managed finally, his voice rough with emotion. "This means more to me than you can know." Keone stepped forward again, her presence drawing everyone's attention. "Now, steward of Harana's future, what gift do you offer in return?" Felix straightened, still holding the statue close. "I promise to help build Harana's first learning center," he declared. "A place where old wisdom and new knowledge can come together. where our children can learn both the ways of their ancestors and the skills to protect their future. He looked around at the gathered faces, the boys who had become like sons to him, the elders who had shown him wisdom, Nia whose strength had challenged and inspired him, the matriarchs who had given him purpose. And I promise that Harana will never stand alone again. The world now knows of your courage and your way of life. Through education and connection, we'll build bridges while protecting what makes this island special. So be it, the matriarchs declared in unison, and the drums burst into a joyful rhythm. The celebration began in earnest then. Children danced, elders sang, and food was shared freely. Felix found himself passed from group to group, receiving hugs, blessings, and words of gratitude. Through it all, Nia stayed close, their hands finding each other again and again. As the morning wore on, Felix made his way to the edge of the gathering. He stood looking out over the bright sea that had once brought him here by accident. The water sparkled with possibility, no longer representing isolation or threat. For the first time in his life, he saw his future clearly. It wasn't in towering office buildings or sterile laboratories. It was here, in this community that had become his family. In teaching boys who looked at him with trust and admiration. In building something meaningful alongside a woman whose strength and heart matched his own. The sound of laughter and music drifted to him on the warm breeze. The ceremonial cloth around his shoulders caught the sunlight, its patterns reminding him of all that had brought him to this moment. He wasn't just Felix Ames, lonely billionaire inventor anymore. He was the steward of Harana's future, and his heart was finally truly full. The morning sun painted Harana in shades of gold as Felix sat cross-legged on his sleeping mat, carefully typing on his salvaged laptop. After a week of planning, he was finally ready to send the message that would secure the island's future. Through a satellite connection they'd restored, he began composing an email to the Ames Foundation's board of directors. "Dear board members," he typed, then paused, choosing his words carefully. "I write to you not just as your founder, but as someone transformed. The past weeks have shown me that true innovation isn't just about technology. It's about people, community, and purpose." The sounds of hammering and cheerful shouts drifted through his window. Outside, the workshop expansion was in full swing. The boys had taken to construction with the same enthusiasm they showed for electronics, their laughter mixing with the steady rhythm of work. Felix smiled as he continued typing. "I propose a long-term partnership between the Ames Foundation and the island of Harana. Our resources and their wisdom can create something extraordinary, a model of sustainable development that honors tradition while embracing positive change." He outlined plans for educational programs, renewable energy initiatives, and cultural preservation efforts. The Foundation's billions could protect Harana while helping it thrive on its own terms. "Teacher Felix," Jomo's excited voice called from outside. "Come see what we built." "Just a minute." Felix saved his draft and stepped out into the bright morning air. The workshop area had doubled in size. New bamboo frames stretched toward the sky, while woven panels created walls that would protect against rain while letting in natural light. The boys had incorporated traditional building techniques learned from the elders with modern elements Felix had taught them. "Look at the solar panel mounting system we designed!" Jomo pointed proudly to an ingenious adjustable frame. "Nia helped us figure out the best angle for maximum sun exposure." Speaking of Nia, Felix spotted her supervising a group of younger boys as they installed support beams. She caught his eye and smiled, causing his heart to flutter like it did every time their gazes met these days. She made her way over to him, wiping sweat from her brow. "The expansion is ahead of schedule," she said. "These boys work harder than any crew I've ever seen." They have good teachers." Felix replied softly. Nia's eyes held his for a long moment. "Walk with me?" she asked. They strolled away from the bustling construction site, following a path that wound through flowering trees. The ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and tropical blooms. "I've been thinking about the future," Nia said finally, her voice holding a note Felix hadn't heard before. "About what comes next for Harana, and for us." Felix's heart quickened. "What do you see?" he asked carefully. She stopped walking and turned to face him. "I see you staying, not just as a teacher or protector, but as—" She paused, then continued more boldly. "As someone who belongs here. With the boys. With me." The hope in her voice matched the longing in Felix's heart. Before he could respond, drums began to sound from the village center, the call to gathering. "The matriarchs," Nia said. "They're summoning everyone." They hurried back, joining the stream of villagers heading toward the council platform. The entire community assembled quickly, an air of ceremony settling over the crowd. Keone, Amara, and Litha stood in their traditional places, their presence commanding attention. Felix noticed they wore their most formal garments, reserved for only the most significant occasions. "People of Harana," Keone's voice rang out. "We gather to mark a moment of transformation. When Felix Ames crashed upon our shores, we saw only a stranger. Now we see family." Amara stepped forward. "You came to us broken, unsure, believing yourself unworthy of love. Yet you gave our boys more than knowledge. You gave them hope, courage, and the father strength they needed. You defended our home," Litha continued, "not with violence but with wisdom and light. You showed our children that true power lies in bringing people together." The three matriarchs moved as one, creating a circle around Felix. Their voices joined in harmony. "You gave us sons, and now we give you a home. Not as a visitor, not as a guest, but as blood of our blood, heart of our heart." Felix felt tears welling in his eyes as the matriarchs draped a new ceremonial cloth across his shoulders, one that matched the patterns worn by Harana's most honored elders. "Once," Keone said softly, "you were a man alone, with all the world's riches but an empty heart. Now you are rich in what truly matters: love, purpose, and family." The gathering erupted in cheers and celebration. The boys rushed forward, surrounding Felix with hugs and excited chatter. Elders stepped up to offer blessings. Through it all, Nia stood close, her hand finding his, their fingers intertwining naturally. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, the celebration spread across the village. Fires were lit, food was shared, and music filled the air. Felix found himself seated on a grassy hill, Nia on one side and Jomo on the other, watching the younger boys chase fireflies through the gathering dusk. The village glowed with warmth and life below them, solar-powered lights twinkling alongside traditional torches, old and new in perfect harmony. The workshop's expanded silhouette stood proud against the purple sky, promising future mornings filled with learning and laughter. Felix looked at Jomo, so eager and bright, who had shown him how to open his heart to love. At Nia, strong and beautiful, who had challenged him to become more than his fears. At the community that had become his family, transforming a lonely billionaire into someone who finally belonged. The fireflies danced around them like stars come down to earth, their light reflecting in the eyes of the children below. Harana pulsed with renewed life and possibility, and Felix knew with absolute certainty that he was home. As darkness settled fully over the island, the rhythm of drums mixed with modern music from the solar-powered sound system. The boys' laughter echoed across the village, and Felix felt the last pieces of his old loneliness fall away. He had found his purpose, his family, and his heart's true home, all on an island that had saved him by asking him to help save it. Dawn broke over Harana with golden fingers of light stretching across the waves. Felix stirred from sleep at an unfamiliar sound, the distant purr of boat engines approaching the island. But unlike the threatening rumble of the mining company's vessels, these engines had a gentler tone. He rushed outside his hut, heart racing until he spotted the distinctive logos of international aid organizations painted on the sides of the approaching boats. These were the humanitarian workers and environmental advocates who had seen their broadcast during the standoff. They came. Nia breathed, appearing at his side. They really came to help. Word spread quickly through the village. Soon the entire community gathered at the shoreline, watching anxiously as the boats drew closer. The matriarchs stood at the front, their expressions cautious but hopeful. The first vessel touched the sand, and a woman in a blue vest stepped out, hands raised in peaceful greeting. "We saw your message," she called. "We're here to help protect Harana." More workers followed, carrying boxes of supplies and equipment. Felix moved forward to translate between English and the island's language, carefully explaining each group's purpose to the matriarchs: environmental protection experts, education specialists, medical teams. "Tell them," Keone said firmly, "that while we welcome their help, Harana's ways must be respected." Felix nodded, conveying her words with care. The island's leadership and traditions remain sovereign. He explained to the visitors. "We work together, but the matriarchs guide all decisions." The humanitarian workers listened respectfully, offering their agreement. Soon the beach became a hive of activity as supplies were unloaded. The boys eagerly helped carry educational materials to the learning center, their eyes wide at new books and teaching tools. Nia coordinated the distribution of medical supplies with the village healers, while engineering equipment was carefully transported to the workshop area. The visitors moved with deliberate respect, asking permission before entering spaces or suggesting changes. By midday, the matriarchs called for a blessing ceremony. The visitors gathered in a circle as the elders performed sacred rituals, marking the beginning of this new partnership. Drums echoed across the beach while traditional songs filled the air. "Our island stands proud," Amara declared during the ceremony. "We accept help not from weakness, but from wisdom. Together we grow stronger." The afternoon sun watched over this blend of worlds as temporary shelters rose along the beach's edge. Felix observed the scene from the council platform, standing beside the matriarchs as they surveyed their changing home. "You brought us more than just protection," Litha said softly. "You brought us a bridge to the wider world, but one that lets us remain true to ourselves." Felix watched the boys helping to set up solar-powered lighting for the visitors' camp, teaching the newcomers Harana's ways, even as they learned new skills themselves. This was more than just aid arriving. It was the dawn of a balanced future where tradition and progress could coexist. As evening approached, the beach glowed with both electric lamps and traditional torches. The sight of international aid workers sitting respectfully with village elders, sharing meals and stories, filled Felix with profound gratitude. Harana had not just survived, it was thriving, growing, while keeping its heart intact. Thank you for being here. If something in this story stayed with you, I'd love to see you again. Subscribe. And tomorrow, I'll bring you another story crafted with heart.